Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Ayin. We're talking about the Ben Sorer Umore, and the Mishnah asks, Me'matai Chayab? From when is he going to be liable to capital punishment? Misheyochal tartemar basar v'ishteh chatzi log yayin haitalki. Rabbi Yosef omer maneh basar ve'log yayin. Only once he eats, we talked about it already before, that he steals and he goes and buys this meat and wine, and he has to eat a certain measurement of meat and wine. How much? Tanakama says a tartemar, which is a certain measurement. It might come from a Greek, tri something, meaning a third of a certain measurement, and a half of a log of wine, of Italian wine, which means a very strong wine. Rabbi Yosef, however, says, no, not a portion, a partial portion, but rather a full portion by weight of meat, and a log of yayin, a full log, not half of a log. So Rabbi Yosef will kill Ben Sorer More less often because he has to eat more in order to be killed, even though this probably never happened. But the point is that he would have a higher requirement. Achal b'chavurat mitzvah, achal be'ibor hachodesh, achal ma'aser sheni b'Yerushalayim, achal neberot u'trefot shekasim urmasim. If he ate with a group that's celebrating a mitzvah, maybe for a brit milah or a siyum or anything that is a mitzvah or a holiday meal, then even though he did all the rest of the things and ate that much meat and wine that was stolen and all that, but since it's involved in a mitzvah, so that's not called Ben Sorer Umore. And furthermore, if he ate this at a meeting that was joined to decide whether to intercalate the month. So this is like a Rosh Chodesh type of meal, either celebrating the Rosh Chodesh or at the meeting when they're deciding the Rosh Chodesh. So that's associated with a mitzvah. Or if it was Maaser Sheni, let's say took Maaser Sheni money and he went to Jerusalem and bought with the money meat and wine, and that's a mitzvah. It's good to go and have a lot of meat and wine for the holiday, and it's a mitzvah to spend the money in Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. In all these cases, he's not a Ben Sorer More. And furthermore, if he eats something non-kosher, that's not a Ben Sorer More. It's a different prohibition, but in order to be a Ben Sorer More, he actually has to have kosher meat and wine. And so if he eats a nebela, terefa, creepy crawlies, lizards, worms, or tebel, produce that was not tithed, or maaser rishon, you gave it to the Levi, but the teruma gedolah was not taken from it, or maaser sheni, or hekdesh, that was not redeemed, and he didn't take it to Jerusalem. So all these things are prohibited to eat. Now this is in parentheses in the printed edition, and some people think it should be taken out because, well, meat can't be made out of one of these things. This is tebel, maaser rishon, this is produce, so how does it fit? But in fact, if we look in the manuscripts, we see it's in almost all manuscripts except for one, which is a Yemenite manuscript, which is written after printing. So for some reason it's not in there, but yes, it is. This line is in all of the other ones. So it does belong here. It's actually part of a list that appears elsewhere and might just be copied here. And there is a way to make it fit if we assume it's talking about the wine, the grapes, from which one makes the wine, or in other ways. So there's a note here about this. But in any case, it is in almost all manuscripts. So this definitely does belong in the Gemara. Achal davar shehu mitzvah v'davar shehu abera. Achal kol machal v'lo achal basar. Shata kol mashke v'lo shata yayin. Eno naaseh ben sorer umore ad sheyochal basar v'yishteh yayin. Or if he ate something that is because of a mitzvah, as we said, or if it's because of a sin, as we said, if it's not kosher, or he ate anything else but not meat, even if he had chicken and donuts and all kinds of other things, that doesn't count. And even if he drank lemonade and beer, anything else, he's only ben sorer more if he eats meat and drinks wine specifically. How do you know? Shene'emar zolel v'sobeh v'af al pi she'en re'aya ladavar zecher ladavar. Shene'emar al tihi b'sobeh yayin b'zolele basar lamo. As we know this because the pasuk says he is a glutton and a drunkard. And even though there's no absolute proof that means meat and wine, we do have a hint to it because the pasuk in Mishleh says, do not be among the wine drinkers, and that's sobeh, that's the same word as sobeh, and don't be among the gluttonous eaters of meat, and so that's zolel, this was mentioned with meat. So since these words are mentioned in conjunction with wine and meat, it makes sense that one is only called ben sorer umoreh if he eats meat and wine, because that he says ben sorer umoreh is zolel vesobeh. That's the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Zera Gemara. Tar temar ze ni odea mahu. Rabbi says, I don't know how big a tar temar is. Ela metoch shekafal Rabbi Yosef bayayin nimsa kofel af basav nimsa tar temar chasi maneh. But I can figure it out. Since Rabbi Yosef doubles the ratio of wine from half a log to a full log, so that means that he probably also doubled the amount of meat. And so a tar temar is a half of a full maneh of meat. Amar Rav Chanan bar Molada Amar Rav Huna eno chayav ad shikach basar bezol v'yochal yain bezol v'yishte dichtib zolel v'sobeh. Rav Chanan, the son of Molada, says the name of Rav Huna, the boy Ben Sorer is not liable unless he buys meat for cheap and eats it, and buys wine for cheap and eats it, as it says zolel. So zol is means for cheap. V'amar Rav Chanan bar Molada Amar Rav Huna eno chayav ad sheyochal basar chai v'yishte yain chai. Rav Huna also teaches that Ben Sorer is only liable if he eats raw meat and undiluted wine, very strong wine. Usually they would dilute it with water in a certain ratio. So only if he has undiluted strong wine. We have a contradiction because Rabbah and Rav Yosef both said that if he eats raw meat and undiluted wine, he is not a ben sorer moreh. Amar Ravina yayin chai mazig v'la mazig basar chai bashil v'la bashil kebesar kiba da'achli ganabeh. Ravina explains the contradiction. In fact, Rabban Rav Yosef, when they said basar chai and yayin chai, they meant if it's totally raw and totally undiluted, then he will not be a ben sorer moreh. And when Rav Huna says that uses the same terms, he means them in a different way. When he said undiluted wine, he means it's diluted somewhat, but not fully diluted. There's somewhere in between. There's some water in it, but not sufficient. So it's just not the right ratio. So it's stronger than usual. And basar chai doesn't mean totally raw. It means cooked but not cooked very well, like scorched meat that thieves eat. Thieves, they're on the run. They stole some meat. They want to eat it quick, so they barbecue it fast. So it's like burnt on the outside, but probably raw on the inside. And so that's a gluttonous way of eating and drinking when it's somewhat prepared but not fully prepared. And so that's when a ben sorer moreh will be liable. But if it's totally raw, totally undiluted, then he's not. Rabba v'Rav Yosef tamre tarvahu achal basar maliach v'shata yain migito and nase ben sorer moreh. We keep adding more and more limitations when in cases that someone is not a ben sorer moreh. So you see, it's going to be really difficult to ever have an actual case. So Rabba and Rav Yosef, we had over here already, they both agree that if someone eats salted meat, like beef jerky, so that's not considered nice meat, that's not as enjoyable as fresh meat, and so that's not considered so gluttonous. And if he has wine from the press, we call that grape juice, that has not been fermented, that's not a gluttonous thing to be drinking, and so that's not called ben sorer moreh. Tenanatam, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit that says regarding similar things, Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam sheneh tabshilin v'lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yayin. The meal before Tisha B'Av, before the fast, one should not have two cooked dishes, only a very simple meal, just one cooked dish. And you cannot have meat nor drink wine, because this should be a sad, somber meal, and one should not have meat and wine that indicates happiness and joy. Vetana, aval ochel hu basar maliach v'shoteh yain migito. However, Braita says that one can eat salted meat, even at that last meal, because salted meat, although it's made out of meat, it's not considered an indulgent, joyous meal, because salted meat is not as tasty as fresh meat. And you can also have grape juice, because grape juice also is not so enjoyable as wine. And therefore, even on the Tisha B'Av meal, one can have salted meat and fresh wine, meaning grape juice. Bebasar maliach ad kama. Now, what's the definition of salted meat? What if it's salted, for an hour, for 2 hours, for 20 days? How long? Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Kahana, kol zman shehu kishlamim. That's the time that you're allowed to eat a shlamim offering, which is a day, a night, and a day. If it's salted for that amount of time, then that's already considered salted, not fresh, not as tasty and enjoyable. And so therefore you could eat that Erev Tisha B'Av. V'yain migito ad kama, when you say you can have a grape juice until when? How long of fermenting? Is it still called wine from the press? Kol zeman shehu toses, as long as it's still fermenting. And how long is that? V'hatanya, yain toses en bo mishum gilui v'chamatesi sato shelosha yamim. Wine that's still fermenting, you don't have to worry about the snakes putting venom into it. So even if it's exposed, it's okay. They don't deal with that kind of fermenting wine. And how long is that? 3 days. So that's how we learn 3 days. As long as it's within 3 days, you can drink that grape juice even on Erev Tisha B'Av. Hachamay. Now I know that's the law for Erev Tisha B'Av. What about for a ben sorer moreh? Is it the same time period, the same definition for salted meat? Hata mishum simchahu kol zman shehu kishlamim na me'it be'simcha. Well, not necessarily, because there for Tisha B'Av, the reason is because we don't want people to have enjoyment on Erev Tisha B'Av. And as long as it's within a day, a night, and a day, like the time to eat a shalamim, it's still very delicious and still will bring someone happiness to eat that. So therefore, that's the definition for Tisha B'Av. Within day, night, and day, it's prohibited. Hachamishum amshochehu. But here for ben sorer moreh, the reason is because one is drawn after it. It's addictive. So for how long is it addictive? Well, even if you wait a small amount of time, once you salt it, then it's already not so fresh and not going to be addictive. It might still be tasty, but it's not going to draw one in and make someone a repeat offender. And that's what we're really worried about for a ben sorer moreh, is he's going down the bad path. And also wine, v'yain ad arba'im yom. Before 40 days, wine is still not very strong, not very alcoholic, and is not going to be addictive. After 40 days, then it's already strong wine, and that will be addictive. So for a ben sorer moreh, he would only be liable if he drank wine that's more than 40 days old of fermenting. Amar Rav Chanan, lo nibra yain ba'olam ela nanachem avelim u'shalem sachar l'rsha'im shene'emar tenu shechar l'obed ve'yain lemareh nafesh. And now we go into a long section about the benefits and dangers of wine. It's a double-edged sword. Rav Chanan says wine was created in this world only to give comfort to mourners. Mourners are very depressed, and so you give them a little wine and it calms them. So there's a good reason to have, it's a good use for wine. And it also gives reward to evildoers. In other words, reward in this world, so that they will have no reward in the world to come. As the pasuk says, give wine to nushecha leobed. Give wine to someone who is ready to perish. That's talking about the wicked people who deserve to perish, and so the wine will make them do bad things, and that way they'll get enjoyment from the wine, and their enjoyment will be their reward, and that's it. They'll use up their reward just by getting a little drunk for a while, and then they'll have no reward for the world to come. And give wine to those who are bitter of spirit. That's referring to mourners, to lift up their spirits. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says, what does pasuk mean in Mishleh? Don't look upon wine when it's red, meaning don't go and drink it. Go after it. Don't go after it when it's red. Don't look at wine and the way that it reddens the faces of evildoers in this world, but it's going to cause them to be white with embarrassment in the world to come. In other words, you see the Sha'im and they're drinking wine and they seem happy and everything's good, and you say, oh, I want to be like that. Don't want to be like that, because this is just giving their reward in this world, and they're going to be all embarrassed in the next world. Rava Amar al terei yain ki it adam al terei yain sha'acharito dam. Rava says a different derasha. Don't look to wine because it causes bloodshed. You think you drink wine, you say, oh look, I'll be happy, but then you drive drunk, or you do something, you kill someone, and that's not a good thing. Rava should know, because he's the one that invited Rabbi Zerah. to a party on Purim, and he got drunk and killed his friend. So this might be from personal experience. Luckily, he brought him back to life the next day. Rav Kahana Rameh, Ketib Tirash, Ovekarinan Tirosh, Zacha Naaseh Rosh, Lo Zacha Naaseh Rash. A pasuk in Yirmiyah that's talking about the end of days. People will come and sing in the height of Sion. El Tub Adonai al Dagan ve'al Tirosh ve'Yisrael b'nei Son ubakar. So they're going to be enjoying with all these things, including wine. Now, wine is written chaser, tirash, but we read it tirosh. So which one is it? So zacha naaseh rosh. If you drink it properly, in moderation, then it could be beneficial. And one who drinks it in a good way will be ahead. Lo zacha, if one drinks it in a negative way, naaseh rash, then they will become poor. Rava Rameh ketib yeshamach v'karinyan yesamach. The pasuk in Barachin Nafshi, v'yayin yesamach lebab enosh. Without nikudot, we don't know if it's a sin. It could be read as a shin. So which one is it? Zacha mesamecho lo zacha meshamemehu. If he merits and he uses wine in a proper way, in a healthy way, then it will make him happy. But if he does not merit, then it will cause him destruction. It will cause him to go crazy. And this is what Rava says, that wine and fragrant spices make me wise. That is, if you use it properly, it can open your imagination. Some writers and thinkers, they have a little bit of a drink, and then it relaxes their preoccupations, and they're able to think more imaginatively, but it also has terrible dangers. Amar Rav Amram bered Rabbi Shimon, bar Abba Amar Rabbi Chanina, ma dichtiv lemi oy, lemi avoy, lemi medanim, lemi siach, lemi pesaim, chinam, lemi chachliyut einayim, lamacharim al hayayin, labaim lachkor, mim sach. Okay, a couple of Pesukim in Mishleh. Let's say, who cries woe? Who says alas? Who has quarrels and complaints? Who has causeless injuries? Who has redness of the eye? Right? What causes all these problems is people that tarry long at wine, and they go to seek mixed wine. So, who has problems? People who drink wine. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar, amri b'ma'arava haykera mande darish le mereshe le sefer midrish, umesefer le reshe midrish. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, he reported that in the West, they say, you can read this pasuk both ways. If you read it from the beginning to the end, then that's a good reading. In other words, when someone has woes and problems and quarrels, that leads them to drink wine. That's true. Well, the causation goes that way. But you can also read it the other way, backwards from the end to the beginning. Those who drink wine will have problems and woes and injuries and quarrels. So it's a vicious cycle. So try not to get into the cycle in the first place. And if you do have injuries and woes and quarrels, well, try to solve them. Don't just drink them away, because actually that will make them worse. So someone that came from the Galilee once gave a derasha that says Vav 13 times in the following paragraph about Noach getting drunk and the terrible thing that happened to him. It's not just a Vav, it's a Vav at the beginning of a word followed by a Yod. And the verbs, all these verbs are with a Vav Haipuch, so we can count them as we go along. You can count them. Vayachel Noach ish adama, that's one. Karem, Vayesh, that's two, that's three, Min Hayayin, Vayishkar, four, Vayitgal, that's five, Betoch Aholo, Vayad, that's six, Cham, Avikenan, Et Arvat Abiv, Vayaged, seven, Lishne Echav, Vachutz, Vayikach, eight, Shem Vayefet, we're not counting that one, Et Hasimla, Vayasimu, that's nine, Al Shechem, Shenehem, Vayelechu, 10, Achoranit, Vaychasu, 11, Et Arvat Abihem, Ufnehem, Vegomer, Vayikatz, that's 12, Noach Meyeno, Vayeda, Et Asher Asa lo beno katan vayeda is 13. So now the context is that says Noach began to he's the first one, I guess, to plant a vineyard, and he drank of the wine. He got drunk. He was uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan will end up being the one that's cursed. But Ham, the youngest son, saw the nakedness. He did something wrong. We'll see exactly what he did. What he did, it might be a euphemism that he saw his nakedness. And he told his brothers outside, he's making fun of his father. It's terrible. So Shem and Yafet, they took a garment backwards, and they walked backwards, they put it on their shoulders, and they covered him in a respectful way. And then Noach awoke and from his wine, and he realized what his younger son had done to him. And so it says here 13 times Vav Yod, which is pronounced Vai. And so this is a support for what it says here. Who says Oi? Who says Avoy? Who says Woe? Who says Vai? Well, if you drink wine, then the outcome is not going to be good. Rav Ushmael, Chad Amar Serso, V'Chad Amar Reva'o. So what exactly did Cham do to his father? Two opinions between Rav and Shemuel. One says he castrated him, and one said he had relations with him. According to the one who says he castrated him because Cham injured his father Noach such that Noach wouldn't be able to have a fourth son. Noach had 3 sons, but he wanted to have more sons, but now he's castrated, so he couldn't have a fourth son. That explains why Noach cursed Cham's 4th son, which is Canaan. So it's midah keneged midah. According to the one who says that the Cham had relations with his father, he makes a gezerah shava of Vayad and Vayad. Over here it says that Cham saw the nakedness of his father. So saw is, if it's just literal, that means he just saw him, which is bad enough. But we do see that Vayad regarding a Shechem who sees Dinah, well, he doesn't just see her, but it goes on and says he took her and he raped her. And so we can assume here also when it says Vayad, just the beginning of seeing, and then ... and you can figure out what else happened from the parallel. So that's the source for that opinion. Now we understand, according to the opinion that says castrated, that's midah keneged midah. That's why Noach cursed the 4th son of Cham, which is Canaan. But according to the opinion that says that he had relations with his father, so why did the father curse the 4th son? What does that have to do with anything? Noach should just curse Cham directly. Cham's the one that made the sin. And the answer is actually he did both, castrated and also had relations with him. Now going back to the pasuk, that Noach began to be a farmer and he made a vineyard. Noach, lo haya lecha lilmod me'adam rishon shelo garam lo el hayayin keman damar oto ilan she'achar mimenu adam harishon gefen hayam. According to this opinion, Hashem said to Noach, so you should have learned from Adam Harishon, right? What happened when he drank wine? Isn't that what caused him to sin? Now, where do we see that Adam drank wine? Oh, this must follow the opinion that says that the fruit that Adam ate from, the Etz Hadat fruit, was in fact a vine, and he ate some grapes, because there is a machloket about what the fruit was. It could be many, many things. It's anything but an apple happens to be. Tetanya, Rabbi Meir Omer, Oto ilan shachal Adam Harishon mimenu gefen haya. First opinion Rabbi Meir says that it was a grapevine. She'en lecha davar shem biyelala la'adam ela yain, because nothing brings about wailing and trouble on a person like wine does. And this would explain all the troubles that Adam had after this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Chita haya she'en hatinok yodeh likro abba ve'ima ad she'tom ta'am dagan. Rabbi Yehuda says it was a wheat kernel that they ate, and that's called Etz Hadat. How do you know what has to make you smart? Well, actually, we see that baby does not know how to say father and mother until he's old enough that he can eat some wheat, since it goes together. So you see that the time of eating wheat is when he becomes smart, and he can say Abba and Ima. Rabbi Nechemia Omer te'ena haya shebadavar shekilkelu bo nitakenu shenemar veitperu ale te'ena. Nechemia says it was a fig that they ate from, because the thing that caused them to sin also was used for their rehabilitation, as it says that they sewed together fig leaves, and so they used fig leaves to cover up the shame that they had from eating figs. So that makes sense as a midah keneged midah. Dibre Lemuel melech masa asher yeseratu imo. And now we're going to quote a few pisukim from Mishle Lamed Aleph, which talks about the words of King Lemuel. And this is a reference to King Shlomo. And this is a statement that he said regarding his mother, who gave him some rebuke and corrected him. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, melamed shekefa'ato imo al ha'amud, v'amro lo, ma beri, u'ma bar bitni, u'me bar nedarai. This teaches that his mother tied him to a pillar, that he deserves to be flogged, his mother, Batsheva. And she said to her son, "What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, the son of my womb? And what are you doing, the son of my vows?" What does that mean? Ma beri hakol yodim she'avicha yereh shamayim hava. Achshav yomeru imo garma lo. What are you doing, my son? Everybody knows that your father, King David, was yereh shamayim. And if you go off the derech, as he did later in his life, so then people will say, well, it's not because of his father. His father was God-fearing. Must be his mother caused him to do this. And so everybody's going to blame me. So stop doing this, my son. Uma bar bitni, and the son of my womb. Kol nashim shel bet abicha kevan shemit'aberot shub enan ro'ot penei hamelech v'ani dachakti v'nichnasti kedei sheyehe li ben mezoraz u'meluban. As all the other women in your father's house, once they become pregnant, that's it. They can't see the king anymore. But I pushed my way in so that I would have relations with him, with King David, even while I was pregnant, because apparently this is good for the child. So you'll be strong and fair-skinned. And so you see how I went out of my way while I was pregnant. So that's why it says, Bar bitni. Right? I gave you this strength, so you should use it for good, not for bad. Ume bar nedarai, and the son of my vows, Kol nashim shebet avicha hayu nodrot. Yeheli ben agun lamalchut. V'ani nadarti v'amarti Yeheli ben zariz u'memula b'torah. V'agun leneviut. All the other wives of your father's house, they would vow and says, oh, I hope I will have a son. If I have a son that's good to be a king, then I will do this and that. But I made a vow, please God, give me a son who will be diligent and filled with Torah knowledge and be able to get prophecy. So, right, and now you're letting me down. And now we quote further in the same perek, it's not for kings, lemoel, it's not for kings to drink wine. Continuation says, it's not for princes to say, where is strong drink? Yeah, you shouldn't be as a king just drinking wine all day. משתכרים ואומרים למה לנו אל. So al lamelachim, you could read like el, and she said to her son, what are you doing like other kings that drink wine and they get drunk and they says, I don't need God. You should not be doing that. The continuation of the pasuk says, and for princes should not say, where is strong drink? So we're reading rozenim not as princes but as raz, as secrets. All the secrets of the world were revealed to you. You're the smartest person in the world, and you're just going to drink wine and get drunk? Or another interpretation, you, Shlomo, all the princes of the world come and rise up to come to your door to visit you, and you're just going to get drunk? That's not proper. Yitzchak says, how do you know that Shlomo, after he heard his mother rebuke him, he made teshuvah and he admitted that his mother is right? Continuing also in that perek, it says, because I am more foolish than man, I have not understanding of man. Who is he talking about? That he's more foolish than whom? When he says, I am more foolish than Ish, that's referring to Noach, because it calls Noach and Ish in this pasuk. And I don't have the understanding of Adam, that's referring to Adam Harishon. They both, as we saw earlier, drank wine and led them to sin, and so too Shlomo realizes, you know what, I should not have done that. Now back to the Mishnah. If a ben sorer more eats in a group that's celebrating a mitzvah, then he's not called a ben sorer more because he's in good company, he's doing a mitzvah. So even though he's eating in a gluttonous way, but he won't go down a bad path since he's involved in the mitzvah. The Biabu says he's only only liable to the death penalty if he's eating with a group that's all idlers, all bad people. But if there's some good people in the group, then he's not a ben sorer moreh. Now this indicates that even if it's not a mitzvah gathering, as long as there's some good people in the group, then he's not a ben sorer moreh. So we ask, v'hanan tenan, acha b'chavurat mitzvah, eno naseh ben sorer moreh, tamad mitzvah, halav mitzvah, fagav delav kula sedikin. But the Mishnah says if he eats in a celebration for a mitzvah, then he's not going to be a ben sorer moreh. That's only if it's because it's for a celebration of a mitzvah. But if it's not in a meal for a mitzvah, then even if not everybody is idlers, even if there's some people that are good, still he'll be a ben sorer moreh. So how do you square what Rabbi Abahu said with the Mishnah? Ha kamashmalan de'af agav de kula sedikin kevad misvah ka'asik la mimshich. This teaches us that even if everybody are idlers and lowlives, but if they're all there for a mitzvah, then that's okay. It could be a bunch of lowlives that happen to be celebrating Chol HaMoed and they're getting together and having a party, so that's okay. So the point is that when it was only be a ben sorer moreh if it's not for a mitzvah and everybody there are idlers. Achal be'ibur hachodesh. Now, if he eats at the meeting at which they intercalate the month, then he is not liable because that's for a mitzvah. Now, what are they eating during this meeting? This is the judges getting together. Are they eating meat and wine and drinking wine? Do they bring that up they go to an upper room in order to have this meeting? We have a baraita that teaches that they only bring up bread made out of grain and some beans. They have a simple meal because they have to concentrate. Okay, so you're right. So we learned that even though all the rest of the judges, they're going up there and they're bringing the simple food, but if this guy, this Ben, goes up and Ben sorer moreh, he brings meat and wine, even though you're not supposed to bring that up, but if he does, even if he does that and he stole it and it's all the right amount and cooked in that way, as we saw, since he's involved in the mitzvah, so he will not be drawn to sin, even though generally that's not what they eat at such meetings. Tenor banan en olin beibur hachodesh pachot ma'asara bnei adam, ven olin la ela bepat dagan v'kitnit, ven olin la ela leor iburo, ven olin la bayom ela balayla. And so now we have a baraita from which this statement comes with all the laws about this. When they go up to intercalate the month, they have to go with at least 10 people, and they only go with simple food made out of grain bread and beans, and one only goes in the night of when it will become a pregnant month, meaning the night of the 30th, when they will decide if the next day is Rosh Chodesh or not. And they do not go during the day, but only during the night. Now, is that true? V'hatanya en olin la balayla ela bayom. There's another baraita that says they don't go up there at night, but only during the day. The answer is we can reconcile both of these baraitot. As Rabbi Chia bar Abba told his son, you should go up early and leave early. In other words, you should enter and leave at the time of sunrise and at the time of sunset. Why? Because that's when people are around and they'll hear you coming and going and know, oh look, the sages went up and they're dealing with the Ibur HaChodesh. So don't go in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping or in the middle of the day when everybody's at work, but go in the sunrise and sunset times when people are around, and that way they'll know that you're dealing with this and they'll be expecting the answer when it's ready. Achal maaser sheni b'Yerushalayim. The Mishnah says if someone ben sorer moreh ate maaser sheni food in Yerushalayim, he's not called a ben sorer moreh. Why? Kevan dechi orchehu ka'achil le la mimshich, because he's eating maaser sheni in the normal way, as according to the commandment. He's filling a mitzvah. And it's actually good to come to Jerusalem. Generally, they would come on the holiday, and he's eating meat and wine. That's what everybody's doing. They're having wonderful meals together with their families and the mitzvah. So that person will not be a ben sorer moreh. He's not going to go off the derech. If someone eats all creepy crawlies, he's not a ben sorer moreh. Adding to that, if someone eats chicken, fowl, that even though that's very tasty, but but it's not the same as meat, and so one does not become a ben soror moreh for that. Hold on, the Mishnah says if someone eats nevela, trefa, creepy crawlies, non-kosher things, then one is not a ben soror moreh. But we should be able to infer from that if it's kosher things, all kinds of things, including bird meat, then one would be a ben soror moreh. See, because it says here, it talks about all kinds of, not just animals, but also creepy crawlies. So doesn't that mean if it's not kosher, it's not included, but if it's kosher, meat or fowl, then it should be included and be a ben soror moreh. And the answer is no. In the Mishnah, is talking about what is included in the measurement to complete the measurement of meat. But in fact, it's focusing on meat. So these are all things that are not included in the measurement of meat. But in fact, this does not include bird meat, only animal meat. That's kosher. What is this clause coming to include? That if you eat something that's a mitzvah or something that's a sin. We already see that in the Resha when it says if it's for a mitzvah and something that's not kosher. So it says this is coming to include things that are only the Rabbanan, like eating when one goes to comfort a mourner. This is the Rabbanan, that is proper to come. You bring food and you eat it with the mourner, but it is a mitzvah, but it's only the Rabbanan. Nevertheless, if a ben soror moreh comes and he eats the meat and the wine as he is comforting mourners, then he's not going to be killed. It's a mitzvah. And Dvar Avera is not only totally non-kosher things mideoraita, but also if he eats during a Ta'anit Tzibur, that the rabbis declare that this is a fast day, so he's not allowed to eat. If he eats meat and wine on a fast day, a D'Rabbanan fast day, he's not killed as a ben soror moreh. And what's the reason when he violates a sin, eats non-kosher or eats on a fast day? Shouldn't that make it worse? And that make it more of a ben soror moreh? And the answer is no, because the pasuk says that the parents come in and say, this ben, he is not listening to our voice. So the problem has to be that he's not listening to his parents' voice only. But if he's also not even obeying God's voice, that's a different problem altogether. But it's not particularly a problem of ben soror moreh, and so he's not killed for that on that account. If he eats anything else or drinks anything else except for meat and wine, he doesn't have meat and wine, even though he has lots of other things, he's not called a ben soror moreh. So the first clause, if he ate anything else but meat, that comes to include this pressed fig cake from ke'ilah, which is so delicious. It's even more delicious than meat. Even though it's so delicious and gratifying, nevertheless, it's not included in ben soror moreh. And if he eats anything else except wine, and it comes to include even honey and milk, which can be kind of intoxicating. Nevertheless, the one is not killed as ben soror moreh, even for eating a lot of and drinking a lot of that. We do see for other laws that these things are intoxicating, and if a kohen eats this pressed figs from ke'ilah, or he drinks honey and milk, and he goes to the Bet HaMikdash, he is liable for going to the Mikdash while drunk. So this can be cause one to be drunk, but still, it's not going to make someone a ben soror moreh. The Mishnah teaches, "Eno naaseh ben soror moreh ad sheyochal basar v'yishteh yayin tenor banan. Achal kol ma'achal v'lo achal basar, shata kol mashke v'lo shata yayin. Eno naaseh ben soror moreh ad sheyochal basar v'yishteh yayin." There's a braita that more or less repeats a lot of the Mishnah. If he eats anything but except for wine, meat, or drinks other things, but besides wine, that's not going to be called ben soror moreh unless he drinks specifically wine and eats specifically meat. Shneimar zoled v'sobez, as a glutton and a drunkard. There's no proof that these words mean only meat and wine. It could be a glutton, can mean a glutton for lots of things. But but the pasuk in Mishlei says, "Don't be among wine drinkers and among gluttons, eaters of meat." So it says soveh. and it says zolel, and refers to wine and basar. So that's how we know. Ve'omer ki sobeh ve'zolel yivaresh ukraim talbish numa. The next pasuk in Mishleh says, because the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. What is that referring to? I mean, simple is that someone's lazy, then he's going to be poor and he'll have nothing to wear. Amar Rabbi Zera, kol hayashen ve'bet hamidrash, Sorato na'aseh lo kera'im shenemar ukraim talbish. Numa, Rabbi Zera gives another interpretation. Anyone who goes and falls asleep in the Bet Midrash, so his Torah will become like tattered clothing, as the pasuk says, and a drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. Because if you're falling asleep during the shiur, okay, you get the first 5 minutes, then you miss the next 10 minutes, then you get a few minutes later, and you wake up and you have just pieces of a shiur, but you can't put the thing together. It's like wearing clothing that's all torn. So that's not a good idea. Get a good night's sleep beforehand, and make sure to have a cup of coffee before you listen to the Daf Yomi, so that you don't fall asleep in the middle and you get the whole thing straight, and then our Torah can be like a nice, beautiful set of clothing. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.